In this episode, I get the honor of introducing you to my good friend, Jamie Truppi. She is the author of a new book called Clean Food, Messy Life, a food lover's conscious journey back to self. So let me tell you a little bit more about Jamie. She's on a mission to help people reconnect to their mind bodies, nature nutrition, and to connect to each other through speaking, writing, and teaching about food consciousness through meaningful food experience that both curious skeptics and Mother Earth would endorse. She's a functional nutritionist. She is an edible educator, food writer, author, local foodie, and a farmer's market devotee. But she also holds an English degree and a master's degree in science nutrition and integrative health, qualified as a certified nutrition specialist by the American Nutrition Association, easy for me to say. And she also holds a certificate in permaculture and design, which is something we talked about that was fascinating to me and something I really learned more about actually in the book itself. She's also a yoga teacher. So as you guys can see, she's a wealth of knowledge and different types of backgrounds that she brings to this book. However, I will tell you, this book does not read like a scientific manual, not at all. It is a memoir of Jamie's life, and it is captivating, it is personal, and it will draw you in. It is so relatable, and she shares her values and why she values getting back to nature and food. And it is just such a beautiful book. You will get to know her and love her in this interview, and I can't wait for you to dive in. So let's go ahead and dive into this episode. Hi, everyone. I have a really special guest here with me today. It is my friend, Jamie Truppi, and she is an author. I'm going to actually let her tell you a little bit about who she is. She's a nutritionist, and she is someone that you are definitely going to want to know. So, Jamie, welcome to this episode.
Thanks, Lisa, for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
So excited to have you here. So I read your book, and it was just such a, knowing you the way that I do, getting to read your book and get to know more about your story and about who you are was a beautiful journey for me. So the book that Jamie wrote is called Clean Food, Messy Life, and it is a memoir, right, Jamie?
It is, and it's funny to write a memoir in my mid-40s because obviously it's not my whole life. So I chose this basically 18-year part of my life specifically about the food journey and how I got to be where I am now with food, since food preoccupies pretty much everything I do. So that's why I chose that time frame. Yeah, but definitely memoir.
Definitely memoir. I love the way that you weaved it in. So, Jamie and I met, gosh, how many years ago? It's probably been
I think it was 2017.
Years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it has been quite a while that we've known each other. And Jamie actually worked with us inside of one of our programs at Rise Leadership Circle. And I actually was also a client of Jamie's. She was my nutritionist when I was moving through some health challenges. And so I loved learning more about your food journey because I've been living a holistic lifestyle for quite some time, for many, many years. And you really brought so many things to the table in terms of when we go through making a big change, like adopting a more holistic lifestyle and talking about how that affects family and friends and the different pieces of the journey. That was something that I resonated with completely and really appreciated hearing how you stuck to your values as you were, not everybody always understands when we make these major changes in our life. And
100%.
the other
and so
piece
it's
of
beyond, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Beyond food memoir, it is a book about relationships, right? So not just our relationship with food and our bodies and our minds and the way we move about the world, coworkers, et cetera, and our partners, but relationships with the greater world, how our values are reflected in our choices and how that affects our communities, our families, our partners, or now ex-partners. So it's a big, it was on the brink of self-help book, but I didn't want it to read that way. So my hope is, of course, that people are inspired to think about the way we make our choices by seeing what I did wrong and or what I did well. I shouldn't say wrong. We're human and we make choices. And so can we make better choices moving forward that are in alignment with ourselves, but also not in direct conflict with what's going on outside ourselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so true. And this was a really unique book for me to read. Like, to be honest with you, I've not read a book quite like it before, where, you really did weave this in as a memoir, but there were so many things about food values that it had me reflecting on in my own life. And so I really appreciated just the opportunity to look at how I felt about food and how there were pieces of your journey that I could absolutely relate to and pieces that I could absolutely learn from. And the other thing I want to say that really stood out to me in reading this book was how really candid you were and just sharing pieces of your life from such an authentic perspective. Like, I feel like you were just really real and you shared it all. And that also, as a reader, made me feel like welcomed into the book, if that makes sense. It was like, okay, to show the real journey of what you've been through. Sometimes if we think about someone who's maybe a nutritionist or somebody who's mastered, some way of living, you really didn't come across at all as preaching as to what someone should do. It was very much a reflection of how the journey unfolded for you as you move through the process. And I loved the opportunity to just reflect on what that was in my own life.
Lisa, that observation means so much to me. I'm like practically in tears over here. We're not even 6 minutes in and I'm like about to lose it, because that perspective means so much to me. I have often felt, and this because we've talked about so many deep things in our work together as with you as my guide, that I've been trying to learn about myself, and I've always felt like I've been too much. My opinions have been told that they're too much. I'm too passionate. I'm too all these things, and I can rub people the wrong way. And part of the story was to be quite unapologetic about who I am, taking that risk to just be me, quite candidly. And the second component of that was giving people an insight into how we perceive someone in one way, and there's so much more, that we can only know someone to a certain level. And even though I wrote this book that is quite detailed, and that's been a big response, like, wow, you shared everything. And I'm like, you should have read the 40,000 words I took out. And that still wasn't everything. But what I love is that I've been able to, let's say readers have been able to approach me with this genuine response to like, wow, I had no idea what you were going through. And this is how it helps me, or this is what I reflected on. And it's been able to create this dialogue and this depth of conversation that I haven't been able to have with a lot of people before. And the judgment has kind of fallen away, which of course, as you know, has been a big part of my journey, is releasing self-judgment. So circling back to that, and my concern with like how people perceive me. And yes, I'm obsessive about XYZ, but am I really? Isn't that just my value and who I am? So it was a big journey in and of itself just to write the book. Yeah. And I've learned a lot from that. I mean, I could write a book about what I've learned about writing a book and how much I've grown from that. So that's been good too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's something that readers will really take away from the book is anyone who feels like they're endeavoring to live an authentic life, to be more of who they really are in the world. And, noticing how other people in our lives react to the choices that we're making. And I feel like this is a great book in terms of, whether you just want a holistic lifestyle or it relates to food, or you're an entrepreneur, or, there's something completely different. There's a choice that you're making. And maybe it has people in your life feeling some kind of way about it. I mean, this is a beautiful guide for navigating that for sure, but so much more. Again, I feel like I learned so much about you in the process. And even though I already knew you, there was just such a depth to this. So excited to get this book into people's hands for sure. And I would just love to give some context to where you are now. So, you and I haven't really had a chance to catch up so much recently, just a few short conversations here and there. So I'd love to just to create some context for where is life for you now? Tell us what's happening on this journey.
This is a big question. And you know me, I can be overly verbose. So just cut me off whenever you feel like we need to move on. I am still on a path toward discovery. And I will probably always be on that path. And that's my path. And in this, I would say recently I've been telling friends and colleagues I'm in a career transition, but in fact, I'm in a career evolution. So in terms of my nutrition work, I still work with clients one-on-one. And now I'm collaborating with colleagues because I'm tired of the solopreneur out here in the middle of the mountains in Idaho trying to wear all the hats, and it's exhausting. And yet I don't want to work for someone. That whole entrepreneur mindset is very strong in my mind, in my body, in my psyche. And so the process of writing the book, of course, helped me see that one of my gifts is storytelling. And that comes up in my consultations. We do a lot of, and the deep dive, we go really into the core. So none of the surface stuff. I've never been a surface person. And so I do that in my work. I do that in my writing. I still write freelance food articles. And I'm moving more toward this pathway. I've had these downloads, right, from the universe, which is something that you helped guide me on, that I need to speak more about a few concepts that are core root values in my world, but also in the greater world. And it's a way to connect people together. So my path is leading me toward more speaking and writing about food consciousness, plant therapy, and nature nutrition, and how we can interweave our values with ourselves, others, and nature to have this more connected and present life in harmony with the interior and the exterior.
I love
I'm going to
that so
stop
much. I'd love to hear more. Like, let's just start with food consciousness. Like, tell me more about that topic and how that came about for you.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I came up with the term. If you Google it, there's not really much written about it. So someone else certainly did too. So I'm not going to claim it, but it's not really a thing people talk about yet. And so what I love about that is it invokes curiosity, which I think is lost in the nutrition world, where we can Google everything and it's there. And that's part of the challenge, right? Dr. Google doesn't have all the answers. And we're looking for the answers in ourselves. And so when we can become conscious of our own choices, conscious of the way we eat, the way we prepare food, where we procure our food, all the little steps, and I'm just talking about food consciousness, right? All the little steps that then leads to the consumption of food, and then conscious of how our bodies respond to our food and beverage, we have this beautiful opportunity to see how well the food is serving us and whether it's a reflection of our values in life. So you could use the word awareness. for sure, there's that. But I think consciousness goes a level or three deeper into almost like a different internal paradigm where it becomes part of who we are, not just something that we talk about. For example, when we have a habit that we want to change, the first step is becoming aware of the habit that we want to change. But we're not always going to change the habit. The awareness is great, and we should absolutely congratulate ourselves for the awareness. But then taking the next step is a conscious decision. So when I talk about food consciousness, it's a pretty broad topic. I have lots of conversations with people about consciousness medicine and spiritual consciousness, and we can expand food consciousness into all of those facets. Like food is medicine, as was proclaimed by sages of yore, and also spiritual consciousness. We can put lots of different I don't know, I kind of want to wrap my arms around that and just like hold that in, because we have so many different ways of connecting with spirit, or whatever we want to call it. And then when we add food to the mix, it completes the picture for me, because we cannot be nourished fully without food. And one might argue we can't be nourished fully without an awareness of our impact in the world, whether it be our role in our family or our community or our job, or in some way. I always go back to nature. Mother Nature is where my food consciousness stems from. That's the anchor for me. I always go back to that, because we are an extension of Mother Earth. And most people have never had that thought. So we humans, all plant life and animal life and insect life and all living things, would not exist on the planet without Mother Earth, in all of the consciousness and unconsciousness that goes along with that. So
yes. I am resonating so much with what you are saying, and I feel like people who listen to this channel will be as well, because, we talk a lot here about how everything is frequency, everything is energy, everything is a vibration, right? So food absolutely falls into the context of that. If everything is energy and everything holds its own individual frequency, and we are people who want to be raising our frequency or being conscious of, raising our frequency, whether we're talking about the way that we're thinking or the food that we're consuming, right? It makes sense that we want to think about where our food comes from. What is the vibrational frequency, so to speak, of the food we're consuming? Because if I'm consuming something and it's physically entering my body, well, if I want to be someone who's living this high vibrational life, of course, I want to be conscious of the quality of the food that I'm consuming. And so that's what I'm picking up as you're saying this. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm totally resonating. And I think another thing that's interesting to me as we're speaking is like, my journey with really switching to a holistic lifestyle went exactly hand in hand with a spiritual awakening and like really growing on a spiritual level. So for me, they were simultaneous. And I'm wondering if you notice that happens with, some of your clients and the people in your circle.
It does. It happens sometimes. I wish I could say it happened more. And it's interesting because I'm in lots of different circles. So, for example, I'm part of this consciousness medicine collective, and we talk a lot about consciousness medicine. And I'm going to be an upcoming speaker talking about food consciousness, because in the last year, no one's brought up food. We talk about plants, like herbs and other things from the earth that are therapeutic for, or reaped from the soil and turned into a pharmaceutical version when we could just get it in its whole natural form. So we have lots of conversations around medicine and healing. And there's another word, healing, that I'd love to come back to if we have a chance. But really, we are I think, less aware of food because we've, as medicine, even though, again, it dates back to antiquity, that concept, because it's something we have to consume every day as part of just daily survival. We do not have to consume quote unquote superfoods or all the supplements and all the concentrated nutrients and all the different formats that are like kind of overwhelming and often misused and misunderstood and probably not needed for a lot of us and definitely needed for others. And so I feel like people have more of an awareness, back to that word, of the supplements they're taking and what they're putting in their coffee and what maybe a chef might be sprinkling on top of a main dish for aesthetic reasons as well as that flavor. But to break it down to its simplest form in terms of nourishment, atomic energy, biochemistry, on a mother nature level and all of its function in the body, we rarely think about that. And most of my clients don't make that connection until we meet, until we talk, or they make a connection in a different way. When I eat this food, I feel this way. What's going on? Oh, that's a biochemical reaction. Or I just had this, I have to say this now, this just popped into my mind. 2 weekends ago, I was co-facilitating a retreat, and this sweet, amazing gal was in the kitchen with me while I was prepping food. And she watched me pull the kale off all the stems and fold the homemade veggie broth into the organic wheat berries from down the road. And she was just like, and it was a very simple meal. And she was like, I cannot believe how much love you're putting into this meal. And I was like, oh, honey, that is what I do. And not all the time, right? Because I'm a mom and I'm busy and all of that, but I'm intentional. And sometimes I get to have this kind of love and space and time around a meal for a group. And after the meal, she said to me, you've literally changed my life with this, I've never before eaten a meal in which I could taste the love that went into it. And it just reframed the way I think about my body and food for my body as it's a loving endeavor. I can love food for myself. And I was like, wow. I mean, I have goosebumps just thinking about it. I was like, oh my gosh.
So do I.
That was
What
so
a beautiful
beautiful.
gift.
I know. And she gave that gift back to me. And so granted, this was a special scenario and circumstance, but again, does it have to be? Do we have to go on retreat to be present in a kitchen with someone who's cooking? Or can we just invite friends over and be like, we're not doing anything else except hanging out and cooking? You know, we've lost that connection with food. And Julia Child speaks about it from the 50s. In fact, James Beard was speaking about it in the 50s. I'm reading her biography right now. So I read this last night about how like we've been reduced to frozen entrees, and this is even before convenience stores, canned foods, you know, all this stuff that's not even food, and we're eating on TV trays. Again, he said this in the 50s, early 60s, and we're basically just doing a modern version of that. Rather than TV trays, and maybe some people still have them, we're eating bars and everything out of the package, again, with like all the protein you need for the whole day, and like, here's all these, eat this one scoop of XYZ organic supplement and you'll have everything you need for the day. And it's like, okay, that's fine sometimes, but does that give you the essence of who we are and what fills us up? Do you get filled up by that? I mean, maybe satiety wise, you might get filled up by that for a hot minute, but yeah.
Right. It's like when we're taking the presence out of it, right? If you think about some of the things we do in health, and no shade because I consume these too, you know, like that protein shake as you walk out the door, or that quick, you know, health bar. But it's like we're sort of taking the presence out because when we're eating these quick foods, we can multitask, right? It's like I can have breakfast and get ready at the same time. I can, you know, eat a snack while I'm driving in my car, and we sort of remove that that reverence, that gratitude, that presence that comes when we enjoy a beautifully prepared meal. Or like you said, with friends, you know, my husband and I, that's one of our favorite things, is to cook a meal together. Like, we just love to, we probably don't take enough time to do it, but when that's a perfect date night for us, is we'll stay in and we'll just prepare together, and we'll have music on and maybe a glass of wine. And, you know, it's just, those are some of my favorite memories because, like you said, it's being prepared with love and joy, and we're so in the moment.
Exactly. And it's an activity like anything else. Sometimes we enjoy that hour-long yoga class or that hike in nature. I mean, there's so many beautiful things to do for ourselves and to be more of who we are in all of these facets. And food, sadly, is lost in that. And I'm not saying prepare every meal from scratch with all this intention and all this presence, because that's unrealistic for most of us, right? And maybe we'll even
Mhm.
lose the joy in that sometimes because we're pulled in all the directions. Yet if we can fold that activity into our lives from beginning to end, and for me, going back to that meal that I was just talking about, I called my friend who's a farmer. I said, hey, I can't find these anywhere in town. Do you have any of this right now? She's like, oh, sure, I'll bring some by. I'll drop it off on your front door. And then I went and got microgreens from this other favorite shop. And, you know, my sister brought the kale and all the things. It was a whole week of planning and procuring. So my energy went into the food long before we stood in that kitchen together. And that brings
Mhm.
me joy. Other people hate it. I mean, some
Yeah.
people like, I hate meal
Right.
planning, I hate meal prepping, whatever. But what if you only did
Yeah.
it sometimes? What if it was once a week,
Mhm.
every Sunday night? And that's all you have to think about the whole week is that Sunday meal. Everything else can be like, fairly convenient, frozen veggies, stick them in the oven with some whatever you eat with. And, even organic food out of a package. I mean, I don't really, it's not that I don't care.
Mhm.
I do care, but I'm also quite aware of the fact that we don't have that kind of time in this modern world, especially
Mhm.
entrepreneurs, especially
Yeah.
those of us wearing all the hats and being a
Mhm.
mom and
Yeah.
all the moving parts. So, yeah.
Well, it's not about perfection. It's really about balance. And can we simply make it a point to bring more of this present moment awareness in? And so, if someone, I want to switch gears here in just a second, but if someone wanted to get started, like, you know, they just want, they're listening to this and they're like, ah, this is resonating for me. Like, I really want to make a point to, you know, create some meals like this with my family. Like, you know, you mentioned just on Sunday. Would that be your advice for someone? Is there anything else that you would want to add to that?
It's really hard to come up with a starting point because everyone's lives are so different. And of course, I do this in my consultations. Besides the clinical, like figuring out the root of your autoimmune disease type consult, there's also meal planning. And when we do meal planning, we start with food values. And that's another term that people don't talk about, like food consciousness. People look at me blankly. What are food values? And I say, well, tell me what you enjoy about food. Well, I enjoy having a meal prepared for me. Great. Maybe you're not the chef in the family. If your value is a quality handmade meal, start there. How do you do that more often? It could be eating out and finding a restaurant where they make all the sauces from scratch. See where I'm going here? So your food value
Mhm.
might not be, I want to do it from beginning to end like Jamie did, where I'm procuring all the things from all the farmers all over town and what's in season, which brings me great joy. That could be super stressful for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Another value might be, I just want to sit down and eat with my family without an argument. I love a peaceful meal. Great. How do we cultivate that? What does the mood look like in the room? Do you want to put a tablecloth on your table once a week? And your nice handmade ceramic ware or whatever. How does that look for you? So you do a lot of this, Lisa, with the visioning work. And what is that space? How does it
Mhm.
feel? What's going on? What does it smell like? Is there music? Who are you with? And if you value sharing meals with your best friends, like do that. Set up a monthly dinner, rotate it around from house to house. Maybe you value have, supporting local farmers, but you don't have time to go to the market because it falls on the wrong day. Sign up for a CSA. Have a community supported agriculture is what that stands for, if you're not sure. Have that delivered to your home. Find a farmer whose values resonate with yours. Maybe your food value is, I really want to teach my kid to have a positive relationship with food. Great. Let's work on our language around food. Let's work on our mealtime conversations and the mood, and then scooping up our children into the process in some way that works for them too, right? So there's so many ways to go about it. Number one, to answer your question after all those examples, is decide what you value about food and start with that, and figure out how you can cultivate more of that.
Yeah. So what do you value about food? And then two, how can you cultivate more of that?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That is so beautiful. So one of the things I want to touch on here is it was so fun, you guys, reading the book, because she was like, "There's a surprise for you in the book." So she actually writes about some of our time coaching together. And Jamie, that was really fun to look back on and read. I was like, I remember that conversation. It was so profound. So do you want to share a little bit about so there was one takeaway particular with one of our coaching sessions that made a profound difference for Jamie. So can you share what that was?
Sure. And Lisa, I think there actually were two like super major takeaways, and I'm pretty sure I edited one out, but if we get to that, I'll go back. But the one in the book that I chose to write about, because again, I had to thread it all around this concept of food, is that one day you said to me, I was definitely struggling. I remember where I was located. I think it was January. It was January. And it's cold here. I live at 5,500 feet in the mountains. And I was not doing well in my relationship. And we had been talking a lot about how you were trying to help me come back to like how I feel about certain things. And you had asked me one time straight up in the way that you do so beautifully, "Hey, Jamie, have you ever thought about how your thoughts are like food?" And I can't remember the exact words. And I was like, "What do you mean?" And you said, "Well, you consume all this healthy food and you're super intentional about your the quality of the food and the balance of nutrients and regular meals and all the things. What about your thoughts? Are they consuming you, or are you consuming them?" Or something like that. And I was blown away, because it had never occurred to me, despite the fact that you and Kayla teach about how our thoughts influence our energy, and whatever we put out, we get back in, and all of the beautiful universal energies. And it never occurred to me that my thoughts were toxic. I think you even put those words together. Maybe I did. One of us did. We did it together in session. Yeah. Oh man, my thoughts are toxic. So here I was, all super obsessed about toxins in my food and pesticides and all the things. Mostly, again, back to Mother Earth. We're destroying her and then consuming that and destroying us in the meantime, slowly over time. And my thoughts were just as bad. I don't think I liked myself. I mean, looking back, it's like I've always liked myself to a point and loved certain things about myself, but I was never aware of the self-deprecation that I was in feeding myself with my thoughts and my words. And you made that pretty aware, and it still keeps coming back. I haven't learned that lesson yet fully. And I've had a few people say that about the book. They're like, "Yeah, you're so self-deprecating, but not harmful. It's kind of in jest." And I'm like, well, yeah, but over time you believe this about yourself. And I certainly did. I thought I was the problem. I was labeled, all these labels, both self-labeling as well as other people labeling me. And without realizing it, I had put myself into this box of pretty dark, limiting labels that I couldn't get out of. And you helped me see that how we talk to ourselves and how we think of ourselves, our perspective on who we are, is vitally important to our well-being.
Mm. Yeah.
And it was like a thing I
Yeah.
knew kind of out there in the,
Mhm.
something I'd read, but I'd never applied it to myself.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been working on that
Thank
ever
you for
since.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you know what? We're all working on it, right? It's like
Mhm.
this is about growing and evolving as humans for our entire life. So,
Mhm.
me too, me included, it's always a practice of remembering the truth of who we are, which, I love to say we're souls first, right? We're spiritual beings having this human journey here.
Mhm.
And we forget our own perfection, so to speak. We forget our own divinity and where we came from. And we
Mhm.
get programmed, over time, we kind of get programmed into thinking that we're not enough or we haven't achieved enough or all the things that I mean anybody watching can probably relate on some level. Like we move through these
Mhm.
things, but I just appreciated you sharing that because I know that's impactful for a lot of people, that we do have to remember what we're consuming. It goes back to what we said about food consciousness. Everything is a vibration. And so
Mhm.
if we're allowing ourselves to consume negative thinking or consume thoughts about ourselves that are not in a high vibrational space, it's going to have an effect, just like eating unhealthy food will eventually have an effect on us. So,
You want to
yeah,
know
thank
what
you
I
for
read
sharing
this
that. That was
morning?
really, what was
This
that?
this is the perfect segue. I'm reading this book called The Intention Experiment, and it's super sciencey and super heady. And this morning I was like reading this part about how these scientists were uncovering the relationship between these crystals and these atoms. And they were trying to separate them and see what would happen when they moved them apart. And it basically defies Newtonian law and all these other laws that had been accepted as truth. So you mentioned like knowing our truth. Well, the truth is we don't know until we go through the life of figuring out, coming back to who we are, right? And that takes a lot of work and a lot of openness and perspective and energy. So energetically,
Mhm.
it's called non-duality, and it's quantum physics, right? And it's this concept that like even when you split, not an atom, but when molecules, I should say, I think they even we're doing electrons, when they move them apart, they act independently of each other, but in relation to each other, regardless of time,
Mhm.
space, all the things. And so this one scientist was like, yeah, and by the way, if that quantum physics defines modern chemistry, and chemistry defines biology, and biology basically defines all of life, then this entanglement, it's called quantum entanglement or something like that, defines all of life. So energetically, everything, and I talk about this a lot, but not in this way, and I hope I gave justice
Mhm.
to the way this book was describing it.
Yeah.
Energetically, everything that we consume, and I think I talk about environment a lot, like what's in your space, who's in your space, what thoughts are in your head, all the things matter, everything
Mhm.
matters. And I'm not talking about physical matter, because even in space,
Yeah.
air and space,
Mhm.
there's this energy moving around, and we have the ability to affect energy in other places. And they've proven
Yeah.
that with math. It's so cool. Like we can think of it as some woo-woo idea, and people have shown that it exists. And so I come back to that a lot with food, and it doesn't have to be live food. There's a whole live food movement, which I'm not saying that's incorrect, but we can still cook our food and gain from that, right? We can still
Mhm.
harvest intentionally, um, and all of this comes back to the word healing. It's not just like, oh, I'm on a healing journey. Well, what are we healing from? Maybe we're healing
Mhm.
from lack of consciousness, or lack
Mhm.
of intention,
Yeah.
or lack of having
Yeah.
no idea what we're supposed to be doing, lack of purpose on this earth, right? Like we're actually not healing, we're growing and evolving and transforming. And I like to think of it that way instead. And when we consume
Yeah.
foods and thoughts that are blocks, we can't remain open because we are designed as human beings to survive. And that survival means we're patterned. And that patterned means we say the same things to ourselves over and over without even knowing it until someone points it out, like you pointing it out to me. Right? So if we're not nourishing ourselves in all the ways, we're just going to get stuck instead of
Thank you for
growing.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like everything affects everything, right? It's like when we make one positive choice for ourselves, for our life, it has an effect on the whole. Like that's what I'm really hearing in this. And that's what I believe that I think is so powerful about, even just one right choice can make a difference. And I also love what you said about that speaks to the power of coaching, which obviously is what we do. But sometimes, like I have a coach too. I have more than one coach. Like we can't always see what's in our own way because we're too close, right? We're too close. We're operating in our patterns. And, sometimes with the way that we think, it's like it's hard for me to be objective sometimes about my own thoughts because I just think it's truth, right? We believe what we believe, and maybe it's a belief we've held forever, and it just feels true for us, so there's no questioning it. Where sometimes we work, whether it's a coach or whether it's a friend who can just really, know how to listen for you. It's not about giving you the answers. It's about helping us see, like, oh, right, I didn't even realize I was hooked into this particular way of thinking or how it was affecting me.
Totally
so fun. I feel like we could just talk and talk and talk. I know we're getting at time here, and I just we barely scratched the surface. We're gonna have to have you back because there's so much more we could say. But I would love if we could close by sharing how people can, number one, how they can get the book. You can share, and I'll actually link it below this episode as well. And how can they connect with you? Like, what's the best way if people want to know more about what you do or continue the conversation? How can they connect?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And I echo your sentiment. I've always felt like we could talk all day long about all the things. So if you haven't worked with Lisa yet, I highly recommend. My book, Clean Food, Messy Life, A Food Lover's Conscious Journey Back to Self, is available on Amazon, of course. It's in ebook and paperback. I'm working on recording the audio, but it's not done yet. And that's the best way to get it unless you're local. I have it in a few local bookstores, 4 places here in Idaho. Working on expansion, but that takes a lot for self-promotion. And then in the book, there's actually a freebie. So there's an access to the Mindful Meal Guidebook, which is a pretty amazing step-by-step how to be more conscious of our food choices using 5 of the recipes in the book. So what we didn't talk about was at the end of each chapter, there's a recipe relevant to the story in the chapter, right? It's not necessarily the recipe I cook all the time or what I recommend for the masses, but it's relevant and people have been cooking them and loving them. So that guidebook, there's a link to the guidebook in the front of the book. And of course, that also brings you back to me in multiple ways via Facebook and Instagram, Jamie Truppi. To my knowledge, I'm still the only one. So you shouldn't have a hard time finding me. Jamie Truppi Nutritionist, if you Google that. And my website is jamietruppinutrition.com. So you can contact me that way. And of course, the website's a work in progress because I'm still doing it on my own. So please forgive me that it's not updated if you're on it right now. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for just sharing with us about your food values, a bit about your journey. You guys, the book is so good. You're going to love it so much. I can't wait until you read it, love it, give Jamie a review on Amazon because it's such a, it's just such a beautiful journey. And you're going to feel like you know her like a sister once you read it. So thank you for being here. This was so great. And I hope we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Lisa. Appreciate you.